Like, with Bella, it was like, we almost gave up trying. And then she bought me like a supercharger for my car. And then with Cece, and then finally up with Nico once or twice, and then like 2 weeks later she's pregnant.
Is that what happened?
Yes. It's just like, it was more of like surprise, scared. I'm like, wait, what? Like we just talked about this. Like, people have brought up the fact like, oh, she was probably pregnant before, like you guys even talked about it. I'm just like, it's not, no. But like, yeah, it was insanely fast. I give it that. Like, that's the only reason I ever gave that notion, like, even the moment of thought, because it was like faster than any other time that she'd gotten pregnant.
You just didn't seem happy. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I don't remember the video much. We did it again, shirt, I think, and I was walking with my cooler or something. And I don't remember like my actual like reaction, like watching the video, but like I could see her probably see like didn't seem like he was jumping for joy type thing.
Yeah, it didn't seem like that.
Did you watch the one of when I found out about Cece?
Oh,
okay.
Is it totally different?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
it was because Bella was in the crib and it had an eviction notice on the.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I picked up Bella and spun her around and whatnot. This time it was just me and Shanann, and she was in the kitchen. I don't know, like, I don't forget what date it was, maybe like June 3rd or 5th or 7th, I'm not sure like what date it was in the video, but maybe I already felt guilty about talking to Nikki at work.
Yeah.
Maybe that was going through my head.
Is that the potential timing? Does that make sense? Okay.
I don't remember the video, what day the video was, but I knew like I kind of met Nikki around like June 1st. I knew like she told me like afterwards.
When you say met her, you mean like went on a date with her?
No, I didn't go on a date with her until she was in North Carolina.
Oh, okay.
Just like flirting stuff.
Yeah, I mean there was natural flirting back and forth, and I was just like, I knew that like with that video timing, I probably just looked like I was like felt guilty for even talking to the girl at work.
And you probably did, right?
Yeah.
Did you guys fight before, you and Shanann? I know you talked about like not really raising your voice and stuff. Was there? Because I want to say, didn't a neighbor talk about them fighting and stuff?
Yeah, but that was embellished and exaggerated, and he retracted that.
Oh, he ended up doing that?
He retracted that, so.
Did you guys ever fight? Did you ever? Was there any domestic violence in your house? Like,
no, like never.
This is strange to us to
Even
have.
from her to you, I mean.
Yeah.
She gets mad when she's pregnant and grabs a knife, or
no, like
scratches you or smacks you around, or nothing.
No, she's never like nothing.
Okay.
That's what makes all this even more hard to understand from my standpoint, and from yours too.
Yeah.
Did she ever belittle you at all? Did you ever feel that way, maybe?
What was that?
Did she ever make you feel like she belittled you, or you felt belittled by her?
I mean, there's always points like in a marriage where like the dominant person like takes control of everything, but like I was just, my whole life I just kind of went with the flow. Like I never like put myself in the center of attention. I didn't want to be.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be in the back row. So I mean, if she did belittle me, I couldn't pick an exact point or time.
She never really felt that way. Right?
No, I mean, I always knew I was like, the introvert, and she was she took control of most situations. Like when people came over, like I knew what my role was.
Yeah.
Like I watch videos of like cooking, or she'd make like power balls, or or like protein balls, or whatever.
Yeah.
You just don't seem like you want to be in those videos.
No.
Like I feel like you were being forced to be in those videos. And correct me if I'm wrong, but
yeah,
that's what it seemed like to me.
I hated being in videos. I mean, I did it for her, because it was for her business and stuff. But like it was.
The suburban silence of Frederick, Colorado, was shattered on August 13, 2018, but the tremors from that day never truly subsided. For most of the world, Chris Watts is the man who discarded his pregnant wife, Shanann, and their 2 young daughters, Bella and Celeste, in a remote oil field. For Ronnie and Cindy Watts, however, he remains a son, a gentle soul they believe was pushed to a breaking point or coerced into a confession that didn't tell the whole truth. This fundamental disconnect between public record and parental devotion is the engine behind their final, desperate push for his freedom. The legal landscape for Chris Watts has long been considered a closed book. By pleading guilty to avoid the death penalty, Watts effectively waived his right to appeal. Yet, in the years following his incarceration at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, a quiet storm has been brewing. Ronnie and Cindy have spent years scouring discovery documents, autopsy reports, and interview transcripts, looking for the one loose thread that could unravel the prosecution's narrative. Their final move isn't just about a new lawyer. It's about a fundamental challenge to the validity of the plea deal itself, centered on the claim of ineffective assistance of counsel and alleged prosecutorial pressure. To understand their desperation, one must look at the letters and calls that filter out of the prison. Chris has fluctuated between displays of deep remorse and finding God to hinting at new revelations about what happened in those early morning hours. These breadcrumbs have fueled his parents' fire. They aren't just fighting the court. They are fighting the memory of a crime that the rest of the world has already judged. As they prepared their latest filing, the tension in the Watts household was palpable, a mixture of grief for their granddaughters and an unwavering, perhaps blinded, loyalty to the man who took them away. The chapter of finality in the American justice system is often written in ink, but for the Watts family, they are trying to rewrite it in tears and technicalities. They believe that if they can just get a judge to look at the new evidence regarding Chris's mental state at the time of the confession, the gates might just creak open.
We'll slow down. I know we only got a few minutes. I know.
But the court's response, looming on the horizon, promises to be a harsh reminder of the weight of a signed confession. The legal strategy orchestrated by Ronnie and Cindy Watts isn't a single hammer blow, but a collection of surgical strikes against a judicial wall that has stood firm since 2018. At the heart of their desperate maneuver is the 35C motion, a post-conviction remedy in Colorado that allows a defendant to challenge their sentence based on constitutional violations. For the Watts family, the constitutional smoking gun is the claim of ineffective assistance of counsel. They argue that Chris was not merely advised to take a plea deal, but was systematically pressured into it by a defense team more concerned with avoiding a death penalty trial than seeking the truth.
Are you guys frustrated with the direction they may have put him through?
Yes, I am. I am absolutely frustrated.
Do you think he was coerced at all?
I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea what the public, to me, that all they wanted to do was just save his life. Just save his life. Well, save his life and life in prison, to me, there's no difference.
Cindy Watts has frequently pointed to the chaotic days following Chris's arrest as proof of a compromised defense. She claims that the public defenders shut her down when she urged Chris to fight the charges related to his daughters. The new legal filings lean heavily on the theory of coercion, suggesting that Chris was in a state of psychological shock, making him unable to provide a knowing and voluntary plea. Their argument posits that the intense media scrutiny and the looming threat of the needle created a coercive environment that rendered his signature on the plea agreement legally void. Beyond the conduct of the attorneys, the family's move involves a controversial re-examination of the discovery documents. Ronnie Watts has spent countless hours reviewing the 2,000-page evidence dump, focusing on the timeline of the morning of August 13. They have sought to introduce new interpretations of the forensic data, specifically the temperature of the oil tanks and the state of the bodies, to argue that the prosecution's version of the murders was physically impossible as described. This isn't just about doubt. It's about a father trying to find a scientific loophole in his son's own confession. However, the final move faces a monumental hurdle: the statute of limitations. Generally, 35C motions must be filed within 3 years of a conviction. To bypass this, the Watts family must prove justifiable excuse or excusable neglect. They are banking on the idea that Chris's mental state and alleged isolation in prison prevented him from acting sooner. As the paperwork hit the court's desk, it wasn't just a legal filing. It was a parental manifesto, a claim that the gentle soul they raised had been buried alive by a rush to judgment. Inside the walls of Dodge Correctional Institution, the man the world knows as a monster transformed into a prolific writer. It was these letters, often written to his family and a small circle of pen pals, that provided the spark for his parents' final legal push. To his parents, these letters weren't just correspondence. They were a roadmap to a potential exoneration, or at least a significant mitigation of his guilt. For years, the official story was anchored by Chris's second confession, that he strangled Shannon in their bed and then drove his daughters to the oil site, where he ended their lives as well. However, in recent communications, Watts began to introduce subtle then glaring contradictions. He hinted at blacking out, claimed he was spiritually possessed, and most controversially, suggested that his previous confessions were incomplete. He alleged that the trauma of the morning had caused a dissociative break, and that the investigators, specifically during the marathon polygraph session, had implanted memories of the events rather than extracting them. Ronnie and Cindy Watts seized upon these claims of psychological manipulation. They argue that Chris was a victim of read technique, interrogation tactics that were too aggressive for his passive personality type. Their legal filing includes references to these prison revelations as newly discovered evidence of a mental health crisis that was never properly evaluated by his original defense. They suggest that Chris was in no state to understand the finality of a plea deal when his own mind was, in his words, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The most jarring aspect of these letters is the shift in blame. While Chris maintains a veneer of religious repentance, the subtext often paints him as a man broken by his circumstances rather than a predator. To the public, this is a classic psychological defense mechanism. To his parents, it is a cry for help from a son who was forced into a life sentence. This chapter of the saga highlights the dangerous power of a subjective narrative when it collides with an objective crime scene, setting the stage for the court's inevitable, and likely crushing, rebuttal. While the Watts family worked to build a bridge toward a potential appeal, the Weld County District Attorney's Office remained a fortress. To the prosecutors who handled the 2018 case, the parents' desperate move was not a search for justice, but a denial of reality. In this chapter, the narrative shifts to the state's response, a cold, clinical cataloging of why the case against Chris Watts is legally bulletproof. District Attorney Michael Rourke has consistently maintained that the evidence against Chris Watts was overwhelming. When the news of the parents' latest filing reached the prosecution, the response was one of practiced exhaustion. The state's primary defense against any motion to reopen the case is the plea agreement itself. By signing that document, Watts didn't just admit to the murders. He explicitly acknowledged that he understood his rights and was satisfied with his legal representation. The prosecution argues that buyer's remorse is not a legal ground for a new trial. Furthermore, the state prepared to counter the ineffective assistance claim with the very timeline the family sought to disrupt. At the time of the plea, Colorado still had the death penalty. The prosecution's mountain of evidence, including GPS data from Chris's truck, doorbell camera footage, and the gruesome recovery of the bodies, made a conviction almost certain. They argue that the defense attorneys didn't pressure Chris, they saved his life. Any suggestion that they failed him is met with the grim reality that, without that plea, he likely would have faced a jury that had seen photos of his daughters being recovered from oil batteries. The prosecution also points to the voluntary nature of Chris's 2019 interview with investigators in Wisconsin. Long after his sentencing, without his lawyers present, Watts sat down and detailed the murders in a way that corroborated the physical evidence. To the state, this second confession serves as the ultimate seal on the case. They contend that the family's focus on technicalities ignores the most damning evidence of all, Chris's own voice. As the court prepared to issue its formal ruling, the prosecution's stance remained unchanged. The case is closed, the evidence is settled, and the victims deserve the peace of finality. While the legal battle played out in stone-faced courtrooms, a different kind of trial was, and still is, taking place in the digital ether. The true crime community, a sprawling network of amateur sleuths, YouTubers, and podcasters, has kept the Watts case in a state of perpetual motion. For Ronnie and Cindy Watts, this digital ecosystem has been both a source of agonizing torment and a strange, flickering beacon of hope. In this fifth chapter, we examine how public obsession has influenced the family's belief that the final move could actually work. On platforms like YouTube and Reddit, thousands of hours have been dedicated to frame-by-frame analyses of the police bodycam footage and the now infamous porch interview. While the vast majority of the public views Chris as an irredeemable monster, a vocal minority of theorists has emerged. These individuals scour the 2,000 pages of discovery for inconsistencies, often feeding their findings directly to the Watts family via social media or letters. This feedback loop has created a confirmation bias bubble, where any small technical discrepancy is inflated into proof of a wider conspiracy or a botched investigation. This digital noise has real-world consequences. Ronnie and Cindy have cited newly surfaced video interpretations, such as shadows moving in the garage, as reasons to question the official timeline. To the family, these aren't just internet rumors. They are the missing pieces the defense supposedly ignored. However, the prosecution views this as clickbait justice, where amateur detectives prioritize views and engagement over the cold, hard facts of the forensic record. The sheer volume of content keeps the case fresh in the public mind, ensuring that whenever the family makes a move, it is met with a tidal wave of both support and vitriol. The role of the pen pal also looms large. Chris receives a steady stream of mail from strangers, some seeking to understand him, others professing romantic interest. These letters often reinforce his parents' narrative that he is a good man who made a mistake or was framed. As the court prepared its response to their latest filing, the pressure from this digital jury reached a fever pitch. For the Watts family, the internet is the only place where their son's guilt is still a debate, providing the psychological fuel needed to keep their legal engine running against all odds. The moment Ronnie and Cindy Watts had been preparing for, the point of no return, arrived not with a fanfare of trumpets, but with the cold, rhythmic clack of a clerk's keyboard. In the Colorado judicial system, once a Rule 35(c) motion is filed, the court must determine if the claims have enough legal merit to warrant an evidentiary hearing. For the Watts family, this was the threshold between their son remaining a ghost in a cell and a man with a second chance at life. The court's written response was as clinical as it was devastating. The presiding judge, reviewing the voluminous filings from the family's legal team, did not find the newly discovered evidence or the coercive environment compelling enough to overturn a signed confession. The court's ruling centered on a fundamental principle of the American legal system: finality. In a direct and stinging rebuttal, the judge noted that Chris Watts had been asked, under oath and in open court, whether he was satisfied with his counsel and whether his plea was voluntary. He had answered yes to both. To the court, the letters from prison and the YouTube-sourced shadow theories did not constitute legal proof of a constitutional violation. The rejection was total. The court noted that ineffective assistance of counsel is a high bar to clear, requiring proof that the lawyer's performance was not only deficient, but that the deficiency changed the outcome of the case. Given the DNA evidence, the GPS tracking that led police directly to the bodies, and the drone footage of Chris at the oil site, the court concluded that even perfect counsel would have been hard-pressed to achieve a different result. The judge's order essentially locked the door and bolted it from the inside, stating that the defendant had failed to provide any justifiable excuse for the years of delay in filing. For Ronnie and Cindy, the news was a physical blow. They had spent their savings and their remaining emotional reserves on a strategy they believed would finally bring their son home. Instead, they were met with a judicial wall that seemed higher than ever. In the wake of the ruling, the Frederick community felt a collective, if temporary, sense of relief. But for the Watts family, the final move had resulted in a final answer they were not prepared to accept. The chapter of hope was closing, and the long, silent reality of 5 life sentences was setting back in. The legal defeat in the courtroom acted as a catalyst for an even deeper, more personal explosion, the final fracturing of the relationship between the Watts and Arzusek families. While the legal system deals in statutes and motions, the aftermath of the final move dealt in the raw currency of grief and betrayal. For Shannon's parents, Frank and Sandra Arzusek, every legal filing by Ronnie and Cindy Watts felt like a fresh desecration of their daughters' and granddaughters' memories. In this penultimate chapter, the narrative shifts to the human cost of the Watts family's persistence. The Arzuseks, who had already endured the unimaginable loss of their entire world, viewed the attempt to free Chris as an act of psychological warfare. Through their legal representatives and occasional public statements, they expressed a weary, burning anger. To them, the new evidence regarding the oil tank temperatures or the alleged coercion of the confession wasn't just a legal strategy. It was a denial of the horrific reality that Chris had admitted to in graphic detail. The Arzuseks maintained that every time the Watts family tried to bring Chris home, they were effectively trying to erase the lives of Shannon, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. The divide became a cultural chasm. On one side stood the Watts defenders, fueled by Ronnie and Cindy's unwavering loyalty to their son. On the other stood the vast majority of the public, rallying behind the Arzuseks' plea for peace. The tension reached a breaking point when the Arzuseks were forced to address the harassment they faced from online theorists who supported the Watts family's claims. The final move didn't just fail in court. It succeeded in ensuring that the two families would likely never speak again. The shared grief that might have once united them as grandparents was incinerated by the pursuit of an impossible exoneration. Even as the court's rejection of the appeal became official, the emotional fallout continued to ripple. The Arzuseks sought solace in the Shannon's Light Foundation, focusing on domestic violence awareness, while Ronnie and Cindy retreated further into their private world, clinging to the belief that the system had failed them. This chapter of the story highlights the tragic irony of the Watts case. In trying to save their son, Ronnie and Cindy further alienated the very people who shared the greatest loss with them. The legacy of the case is now one of two houses, forever divided by a crime that one side can never forgive and the other cannot fully accept. The final gavel has echoed through the halls of the Weld County Courthouse, leaving behind a silence more profound than the one that preceded it. For Chris Watts, the final desperate move by his parents did not result in a dramatic exit from his cell in Wisconsin. Instead, it reinforced the gravity of the steel and concrete surrounding him. In this concluding chapter, we reflect on the ultimate finality of the case and the quiet, enduring shadow it casts over everyone involved. For Ronnie and Cindy Watts, the court's rejection of their appeal marks the end of a legal road. There are no more Hail Mary motions, no more hidden discovery files to unearth, and no more scientific theories that can override a mountain of forensic evidence and a voluntary confession. They are left with the reality of a son who will, in all likelihood, never breathe free air again. Their journey has been one of Shakespearean tragedy, a refusal to believe that the boy they raised could commit the unthinkable, leading them to a crusade that alienated them from the world and the Arzusek family. Their story serves as a haunting case study in the limits of parental devotion. Inside the prison, Chris Watts faces a different kind of finality. Deprived of the hope that his family's legal maneuvering provided, he is left with the weight of his own actions. Reports from within the facility suggest a man who has retreated into a routine of prayer and correspondence, a model inmate who remains a polarizing figure even behind bars. To the public, he is a cautionary tale of the family annihilator, a psychological archetype that continues to baffle criminologists. To himself, he is a man seeking a redemption that the legal system, and many in the court of public opinion, believe he can never truly earn. The legacy of the Watts case, however, extends far beyond the prison walls. It has fundamentally changed how the public consumes true crime, highlighting the thin line between digital sleuthing and harassment. It has sparked vital conversations about domestic violence, the perfect image of social media, and the psychological pressures of modern life. As the sun sets on the Frederick neighborhood where it all began, the house on Saratoga Trail stands as a silent monument to a life that was, and a tragedy that can never be undone. The final move is over. The court has responded with a definitive no. What remains is the memory of Shannon, Bella, Celeste, and Nico, a memory that survives not through legal filings or prison letters, but through the hearts of those who loved them and a world that promised to never forget their names.